Montana Territory, June 1881. The wind howled down off the crazy mountains like it had something to say, but no one listened. Least of all the woman trudging up the gravel slope toward the boarded-up barn, her skirts soaked from the waist down in creek water and her boots caked in mud. Keziah Whitlow had nothing left but calluses and 2 children to keep alive. She tightened her grip on her son's hand. "Come on, Perry, we're almost there," she said, voice low but steady. Her daughter, Petey, just 6, clung to her skirts with a stubborn grip that reminded Keziah too much of her late husband. The ranch looked abandoned, but the fence was sound and the house still stood. That was more than could be said for anything they'd passed in the last 50 miles. The horse had gone lame 2 days ago. She'd had no choice but to put it down and walk. She did not expect anyone to answer when she banged her fist on the door, but it swung open anyway. A man stood there, tall, sun-browned, his shirt unbuttoned at the throat and sleeves rolled to the elbows. His hand hovered near the revolver on his belt, but he did not draw. Keziah straightened her spine. "I need shelter for the night," she said. "Just one night. We'll be gone by morning." The man's eyes dropped to the children. He looked like he had not spoken to another soul in months, maybe longer. "You walked here?" he asked. She nodded once. He stepped aside. "Come in." Inside smelled like wood smoke and solitude. The hearth had gone cold, but there were fresh-cut logs stacked beside it. The man moved to light it without another word. "I'm Keziah," she said, setting Perry and Petey on a bench near the wall. "Keziah Whitlow, this is Perry and Petey." The man crouched by the fire, striking steel to flint. "Kassian Elmwood. You live here alone?" He nodded once, quiet. She waited, arms crossed. "You gonna ask what happened to their father?" "No." He got the fire going, the light flickering across his face. He looked younger in the glow, maybe 30. His eyes were tired, though, real tired. She sat down, her limbs aching all the way through. "He died in Kansas last winter. Fever took him. His brother took the farm. We took what we could carry." "I got beans and salt pork," Kassian said, already moving toward the back room. That night they ate in near silence, save for Petey's soft humming and Perry's questions about the fire. Kassian answered them all. He even let Perry touch the flint. Later, when the children slept on a thick quilt by the hearth, Keziah sat by the door staring out at the moonlit fields. "You can sleep in the bed," Kassian said behind her. She did not turn. "I do not sleep much." "You should." She looked at him then. "Why are you here alone?" He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Used to be my father's land. He died 3 years ago. I stayed." "No wife?" He shook his head. "No." She studied him. "Why did you let us in?" He shrugged. "You knocked." Something about that made her throat tighten. She looked away. The next morning she packed her things before the children woke. She did not want to risk depending on anyone. "Where will you go?" Kassian asked from the doorway. "North. There's a mining town past the ridge. Someone there might need laundry done." He looked toward the mountains. "That is a hard path, especially with little ones." "I have done harder." He nodded, stepping aside. She reached for the door. "Stay," he said, and his voice broke on the word like the first rain after a long drought. She froze. Kassian's hands were clenched, jaw tight. "I do not mean forever, just stay a while until you do not look so worn through." She turned to face him. "Why?" He swallowed hard. "Because I want to know what your laugh sounds like." Her breath caught. Perry stirred on the quilt behind her. Keziah stepped back inside. She stayed. Days passed. The children helped Kassian feed the chickens and carry water from the well. Petey followed him like a duckling. Perry asked him more questions than Keziah thought any man alive could answer, but Kassian tried. Keziah mended the curtains and cooked what she could find in the pantry. Kassian brought back rabbits and wild onions from his traps. They shared quiet meals, shared long silences on the porch. One night after the children had gone to sleep, Keziah sat at the hearth mending Perry's trousers. Kassian sat beside her. "I like having you here," he said. She looked up. "I like being here." He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her. Her skin burned where his fingers had been. "I do not know what this is," he murmured, "but I do not want it to stop." She nodded, heart hammering. "Me neither." That night when she went to bed, she left the door open. And in the morning, she was still smiling. The wheatgrass had grown thick around the west fence post, and Kassian knelt to dig it out with a hand spade dulled from years of use. He didn't look up when Keziah crossed the yard with a tin cup in one hand and a folded scrap of mended flannel in the other. "You missed breakfast," she said. He dusted soil from his fingers and took the cup. "Wasn't hungry yet." She didn't press him. She never did. Instead, she tucked the flannel beside the fence rail. Perry's coat. He tore the sleeve climbing after that cat again. He sipped the water, eyes on the distant ridge where the sun was rising warm through a thin blue haze. "You so quiet. You dig quieter." That earned a breath of something close to amusement, though he didn't smile. Not quite. Keziah sat on the overturned crate near the fence, watching the far pasture. "You ever think about selling this place?" Kassian's fingers stilled on the spade. "No," she glanced at him, brow lifted. "Not even once," he shook his head. "My father's buried here, my mother too. Land's not much, but it's mine." She nodded, brushing a bit of straw from her skirts. "I understand." He leaned back on his heels, watching her. "Did you grow up on a farm?" "Not like this. My father was a millwright outside Emporia. We had a garden patch, a cow, and a leaky roof." She looked toward the barn. "He died when I was 13. After that, there wasn't much choice. I married young." "Too young," she met his gaze. "Yes." Kassian didn't ask more. She liked that about him. Behind them, Perry's voice rang out from the creek bed where he and Petey hunted frogs with a tin pail. Keziah looked over her shoulder to make sure both were upright and dry, then settled back. "I've been thinking," Kassian said, brushing dirt from his palms. "Dangerous habit." He leaned against the fence post. "If you're willing, I could use help planting the south field. It's late, but we might still catch a harvest. Enough to get through winter." Keziah studied him. "You offering wages?" "No," he said. "I'm offering partnership." She didn't speak for a long time. Wind moved through the grass, rustling soft like distant water. "I've never farmed wheat," she said. "You learn fast." "And if I say yes, you stay," he said. "Until you don't want to." She stood and brushed her hands on her apron. "You got seed?" "In the loft." "Then we'd better get it down before Perry finds it and turns it into a fort." Kassian picked up the spade and followed her toward the barn. The silence between them felt different now, not empty but waiting. Inside, the loft ladder creaked under his weight. He passed down sack after sack, and she stacked them with care, checking for holes or damp. Her hands moved with purpose, steady and sure. "You were right," she said, tying off a sack. "This land's not much, but it's enough." Kassian looked at her, dust in his hair and sun in his eyes. "It could be more if it's ours." She didn't answer, not yet. That evening, as dusk settled in and the sky turned the color of ashes and violets, Keziah stood at the kitchen table, cutting salt pork into thinner strips. The children slept early, worn out from a day of frog chasing and rock stacking. Kassian leaned in the doorway, arms folded. "You ever think about building another room onto this place?" she asked, not looking up from the knife. "Often," she nodded. "You'd need help. I'd ask you first." Keziah set the knife down and turned toward him. "Seems like we're building something already." His voice was quiet. "You afraid of that?" "No," she said, brushing her hands clean on a cloth. "I'm afraid of stopping." Kassian stepped forward, close enough to touch. "I won't let that happen." She looked up at him, and for the first time she saw not just a man who had stayed behind but a man who had waited. "I know," she whispered. He kissed her then, slow and certain, like he'd meant to for days but waited until she was ready to take it. When he pulled back, her hands were still on his shirt, and her breath trembled against his collarbone. "Tomorrow we start the field," she said. "Together," she nodded. "And after that, we keep going," he said. "One day at a time." She rested her forehead against his chest. "That's all I want." The morning wind carried the scent of tilled earth and pine pitch as Keziah tied her hair into a knot and stepped into the field. Kassian was already there, sleeves rolled, blade of the plow catching the first light of day as he guided the mule in a slow, sure line through the soil. He looked up when she crossed the fence, and something eased in his shoulders when he saw her. She took up a hoe without needing to ask where, and together they worked in the hush of morning, the only sounds the scrape of tools and the low grunt of the mule. By midday, Petey came running down the slope from the house, breathless and red-faced, holding a folded scrap of paper. "A man rode up," she said. "He left this for Mama." Keziah wiped her hands on her apron before taking it. Her name was scrawled across the front in a hand she hadn't seen in years. Samuel Pike, her late husband's cousin. She read the letter once, lips pressed tight. Kassian didn't ask. That evening, while the children washed up with the bucket near the stoop, Keziah sat on the porch with Kassian and unfolded the letter again. "He says he's coming in 2 weeks. Claims he has a claim on the children. Says he's their blood, and I've no right to take them so far from Kansas." Kassian's jaw tightened. "That man ever lift a finger for them?" She shook her head. "Not once. He's after something else. Wants to look like a respectable man with kin under his roof. Maybe thinks he can use Perry on the farm. You plan to answer him?" "No." Kassian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "If he shows, I'll stand with you." She watched the last of the sun vanish behind the ridge. "You do that." "I wouldn't let them go," he said. "Not from here." "Not from you." She looked at him, long and steady. "You mean that?" "I do." The days that followed were restless. Perry asked why she kept glancing out the window. Petey clung to her skirts more than usual. Keziah didn't explain. She just kept working, baking, mending, planting until her hands ached and her back stiffened from the weight of it all. One night, as she kneaded dough on the table, she spoke without looking up. "My husband's people never saw me as anything but a mouth to feed. Samuel offered to take me in after the burial, but made it plain he'd expect more than cooking and laundry. I took the children and went." Kassian leaned against the doorframe, arms folded across his chest. "He touches you, I'll bury him myself." She met his eyes. "I don't want more blood. I just want him gone." He nodded once. "Then we'll make sure he leaves empty-handed." The next morning, Kassian hauled a pile of rough-cut boards to the north side of the house and began framing a wall. Keziah watched from the garden, a bowl of peas in her lap. "You building a coop?" she called. He didn't stop hammering. "Room." She stood, brushing off her hands. "For what?" "For all of you." Keziah crossed the yard and leaned on the half-raised frame. "You never asked." "I didn't figure I had to," he said, pausing to wipe his brow. "You're already here." She looked at the fresh boards, then back at him. "This mean you've made up your mind?" He nodded. "I want you to stay, not for a season, for good." Her voice caught. "You'd have my children too. They're already mine in every way that matters." She reached for his hand, calloused and warm in hers. "Then I'll help you finish this room." That night, she lay beside him for the first time, the children asleep just beyond the curtain that hung across the small space. Her hand rested over his, and the quiet between them no longer felt uncertain, it felt like a promise. Outside, the sky was clear and full of stars. Inside, the air held the scent of pine and bread and something new, something that might last. and in the dark, when he whispered her name, she answered with a kiss that told him she was home. The man rode in just after the noon whistle of wind through the cottonwoods, dust lifting behind his horse in a lazy trail. Keziah saw him first from the edge of the pasture, where she was pulling weeds from between the rows of new wheat. Her mouth went dry. She stood slowly, brushing her palms against her skirt, and walked toward the house without hurrying. Kassian stepped out from the barn with a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. One look at her face and he dropped it. He's here. Kassian didn't speak. He just nodded once and walked beside her. The rider dismounted with a grunt and tied his reins to the porch post without asking. His coat was the fine sort stitched along the cuffs and collar, too clean for a man who claimed to run a farm. His boots were polished. The boy inside the man she remembered from Kansas was gone. What stood now was a man who expected doors to open for him. He took off his hat and smiled like he was greeting a neighbor. Keziah. She stopped at the foot of the steps. Samuel. He looked past her toward the wheat rows and then toward the barn, where Perry's laughter echoed faintly. "You've been busy. I've been surviving. You didn't answer my letter. I didn't think it deserved one." Kassian climbed the steps and stood beside her, hands loose at his sides, but his shoulders had gone still. Samuel's gaze flicked to him, then back to Keziah. "You planning to raise them here, in this place? They're safe, fed, warm, they're loved. You think that's enough?" His voice wasn't cruel, it was worse, condescending, like he was explaining a simple truth to a stubborn child. "It's more than you ever gave them." Samuel's jaw shifted. "I'll be plain, I've made arrangements, I've got a place ready for them, legal papers if it comes to it." Keziah didn't flinch. "You think you can take them from me? I think I can give them a proper life." "You don't know them," Kassian said, voice low. "You don't know the girl who sings to the chickens or the boy who built a dam across the creek with his bare hands. You don't know the woman who carried them across 3 states and never once asked for pity." Samuel's lip curled. "And you do." "I see them," Kassian said. "That's more than you've done." Keziah stepped forward, her hands tight at her sides. "You will not take them from me. You have no right." Samuel's face darkened. "You think this man's going to keep you safe? You think this shack and a patch of dry land are enough?" "They are," she said. "Because this place is honest. Because no one here has lied to me. That's more than I can say for you." Behind them, the door creaked open. Perry stood on the threshold, Petey's hand in his. "Go inside," Keziah said softly, without looking back. They obeyed. Samuel watched them disappear through the door, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Then he looked at Keziah again. "You'll regret this." "No," Kassian said. "You will." Samuel's gaze lingered a moment longer, then he tugged his gloves tighter and mounted up without another word. The horse turned in a slow arc and started back down the hill at a steady trot. Keziah didn't move until the dust had settled. Inside, the children waited with wide eyes. Perry tugged at her sleeve. "Are we leaving?" She knelt and took his hand. "No, sweetheart. We're staying." His shoulders sagged with relief and he wrapped his arms around her neck. Petey climbed into her lap, quiet and small. Kassian knelt beside them. "No one's taking you from here." That night, Keziah stood by the window after the children slept, her fingers resting on the sill. Kassian stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned into him. "He'll try again." "Let him," she turned. "You're not afraid?" "I was. Of losing what we've made here. But I'm not anymore." "Why?" "Because you didn't run." She touched his face, her thumb tracing the ridge of his cheekbone. "I stayed." He kissed her slowly, with the quiet certainty of a man who'd found where he belonged. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. "We'll build that extra room," she whispered. He smiled. "We'll need it." Outside, the stars hung low and bright, and the wind didn't howl that night, it sang. The rains came hard that July. Not in days of steady mist, but in sudden downpours that turned the pasture to muck and soaked through the seams of the barn roof. Thunder cracked low and wide across the basin, and the wind carried the smell of wet sage through the open windows of the house. Keziah moved carefully now, her belly rounding beneath her apron in a way that changed the shape of her walk. She didn't complain. Kassian noticed it anyway, the way she sat more often to shell peas, the measured breaths she took when standing too long. He adjusted without words, drew the water, lifted the heavier baskets, started the morning fire before she stirred from bed. "You're going to wear a hole in that floor," she said one evening, watching him pace from the hearth to the window and back again. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I thought I fixed the leak in the barn. I didn't." She folded her knitting in her lap. "It's just rain. We've weathered worse." He crouched beside her, resting one hand on the curve of her knee. "I know. I just hate seeing you work so hard." She touched his cheek, the pads of her fingers cool and gentle. "You think I'd rather be somewhere else?" "No." "Then this is what I want." Outside, the rain softened. The creek would swell by morning, but it would hold. The next day, Kassian found Perry on the back stoop, his face drawn with worry as he stared at a wooden carving in his hands. It was rough, a crooked-legged fox with uneven ears, but he'd shaped it himself from a pine block with the whittling knife Kassian had given him 2 months back. "Something wrong with it?" Kassian asked, sitting down beside him. Perry shrugged. "I was going to give it to Mama, but I messed up the tail." Kassian took it, turned it over in his calloused hands. "You think she's going to look at the tail first? She'll notice. She'll notice you made it. That's what matters." Perry leaned his head against Kassian's arm. "You think she's scared? About the baby?" Kassian didn't answer right away. "I think she's strong. But strong people get scared too. That's how they know what they love." Perry nodded, quiet. "I don't want anything bad to happen." "Nothing will," Kassian said. "I promise." The baby came at the end of August, just as the heat broke and the wheat turned gold in the fields. Keziah labored through the night, her jaw tight, voice steady even through the worst of it. Petey stayed with the neighbor woman from over the ridge, and Perry waited on the porch, knees drawn up, back against the door. Kassian never left Keziah's side. He held the basin, brought water, pressed her hand against his chest when the pain stole her breath. When the cry finally came, sharp and strong, he covered his face with one hand and let out a sound low in his throat, a sound he hadn't known he'd been holding. "It's a girl," Keziah whispered, eyes glassy with tears. He took the baby in his arms, all red skin and dark hair, and looked at Keziah like he was seeing the world made new. "Name her," she said. He looked down at the child, then back at the woman who had rebuilt him with her quiet courage. "Grace." That autumn, the fields yielded better than expected. The wheat filled the bins and left enough to trade in town. Keziah stitched dresses for Petey from old flour sacks and taught Perry his letters by lantern light. Kassian built a cradle from the leftover barn wood, and Grace slept in it by the hearth, her tiny fists curled like roots newly planted. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Keziah sat beside Kassian on the porch. The stars were out, and the wind had turned cool. "I want to be your wife," she said simply. He looked at her, startled. "I thought you already were." She smiled, slow and sure. "Not properly, not yet." He took her hand, thumb brushing the old burn mark near her wrist. "Then let's make it right." They married the next Sunday, beneath the cottonwood by the creek. Perry held the rings, Petey scattered wildflowers, and Grace gurgled in Keziah's arms. The neighbor woman brought bread and smoked trout, and the sun stayed out all through the afternoon. As the last light faded and the children drifted to sleep in the house they now called their own, Kassian and Keziah stood at the fence line, looking out over the land they'd stitched together with sweat and patience. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We wake up, we work the land, we raise our children, we love each other." He kissed her temple, slow and reverent. "That's enough for me," and it was. Through winters that came sharp and sudden, through springs that painted the hills with wild lupine, through the years that softened their hands but deepened their bond, they stayed, together, always.